requiring the way, so sure. Down.
This one that gets
I should do it. Okay, well, thank you again. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Chris Ventiloro, and I'm a Water Quality Standards Coordinator with the Division of Water Resources. And today we have an action item for you for the 2023 through 2025 Surface Water Training Review Amendments to Select Rules in 15A NCAC O2B 0200. Just as a quick reminder about the triennial review, surface water quality standards are regulated under the Federal Clean Water Act, and EPA administers the Clean Water Act under Title 40 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Title 40, well, the triennial review itself is a rulemaking process to adopt standards into North Carolina's rule, and per Title 40 CFR 131.20, states are required to meet certain criteria for each triennial review. You have to review water quality standards and EPA 304A criteria, hold public hearings at least every 3 years, provide scientific justification for changes to water quality standards, document reasons for not adopting EPA's published 304A criteria, and submit water quality standards for review within 30 days of final state action. This triennial review, we've kind of come before you a few times with this one. And first, we started with a number of proposed focus topics. And you can see the full list of them here. We're proposing today to proceed with the two that are shown in the upper box there. And the two that we're proposing to proceed today with would be revisions to the primary recreation standard for Class B waters, that's Class B freshwater primary recreation waters, as well as revisions to the language for water quality standards variances that appears in O2B 0226. The remaining topics that we had previously put forth, we're proposing to remove those from this rulemaking due to some ongoing evaluation of those topics. So the topics being removed would be the updates to human health exposure factors in O2B 0208, the updates to select existing human health criteria, some technical corrections associated with those rules, as well as the revision to, or the updating and adoption of the 1,4-dioxane numeric criteria. So that brings us to the first topic that we're proposing revisions for today. And that first topic would be updating the criteria for primary recreation waters. So North Carolina has had bacterial indicator criteria for primary recreation waters, or Class B waters, in the state since the very early days of the water quality standards. It's back to the 1970s. And from that time, we've really always relied on fecal coliforms as a bacterial indicator of gastrointestinal illness. Now in 2012, EPA published updated bacterial indicator criteria for these freshwater, well, for both freshwater and marine primary recreation waters. As part of this update, they reevaluated their older epidemiological studies for fecal and E. coli levels that provide the relationships for gastrointestinal illness rates in recreators. They included some additional, more recent epidemiological studies into that data set. They evaluated some new rapid test methods such as qPCR, and they also provided states an option to use either E. coli or Enterococcus bacteria as more updated, more recent bacterial indicators that better correlate to the rates of gastrointestinal illness in recreators recreating in surface waters. So this slide just shows a brief overview of where in North Carolina the Class B waters are distributed. Just an important note, we're only talking today about the freshwater Class B primary recreation standards. There are saltwater primary recreation standards. Those are Class SB. Those already have updated bacterial indicator criteria, so we're not discussing those today, and that's why you don't see any waters along the coast highlighted. So in order to help with the development of North Carolina's proposed update to switch to E. coli from the fecal coliform as the bacterial indicator, North Carolina conducted a study of the E. coli and fecal coliform pathogenic indicators for recreational waters, and this report was provided to the committee a little while ago in a few different prior information items and action items, I think. But it was published on January 10th in 2024. It's also attached with the materials today, and I definitely recommend taking a look at that. The slides here are, in order to be concise, we didn't provide repeat a lot of that information, but I'll kind of touch on some of the information provided in that report. So the study that was done analyzed ambient or in-stream samples, as well as some effluent samples to determine levels of fecal coliforms and E. coli to draw some comparisons. The report compared the exceedance rates for comparing the existing fecal standard to 4 different potential E. coli criteria options. And those options can be found on page 5 of that report. And basically, it's just using 2 different illness rates that EPA recommended and different geometric mean and statistical threshold value options. And we did this to kind of just compare different ways of looking at the E. coli criteria to see how they compare to the fecal coliform standard that's already in existence. So the ambient monitoring results showed a similar exceedance rate between the existing fecal coliform standard and each of the 4 E. coli options 1 through 4. Now, some of the effluent results that were analyzed showed a little bit of greater potential for exceedances when options, I believe it was 1 and 3 of the E. coli were used. So ultimately what this information, as well as some other information, helped us kind of to narrow down for which E. coli option we would recommend proposing to update. So basically, E. coli option number 2 was selected. It's proposed to move forward with. And this is consistent with other EPA Region 4 states. And it's also consistent with the current criteria exceedance rate. It also provides similar protection as fecal coliform water quality standards and would have a minimal impact to permittees. The proposed amendment for this item would be to update the recreational standard for primary recreation waters in 15A NCAC 02B 0219 3B using E. coli as the bacterial pathogen indicator. And the language with the proposed amendments is shown here. One thing I wanted to note is that the basic structure of this language is the same as what the current language is for the current fecal coliform standard. The main differences are the inclusion of E. coli, or shown here as Escherichia coli, which Escherichia is the full genus name of the E in E. coli, and the substitution of the appropriate geometric mean and 20% exceedance rate values. So that brings us to the second proposed item. North Carolina currently has language in the OTB 0226 rule that basically states that the commission may grant variances to water quality standards. Through conversations with EPA during the past triennial review and this current triennial review, EPA has requested that states update their rule language for variances to better clarify what the requirements are to be able to get a variance over. So they provided two options for which states could use to do that. The first option is to basically take the existing language from 40 CFR 131.14 and put that in the state rule. And the second option is to just simply reference 40 CFR 131.14 as where the requirements for variances are. So the proposed amendment for this item is to clarify the requirements for variances in 15A NCAC 02B 0226 by including a reference to 40 CFR 131.14 as requested by EPA. And this table just shows a brief summary of the regulatory impact analysis. The regulatory impact analysis for this version of the triennial review was approved by OSBM. I believe it was October 29th, 2024 that they certified it. It's included as one of the attachments for this item as well. And just a quick rundown for the proposal to update the Class B waters using the E. coli bacterial indicator. The economic impacts is expected to be cost savings of approximately $0 to $25 per sample for facilities covered under the NPDES wastewater and stormwater permits. No costs are anticipated to the state's lab certification program or to commercial laboratories. A lot of laboratories already use the more current E. coli monitoring methods, as they're much more preferred from every lab that we've spoken to. And there's also expected to be a net cost savings of about $1,150 annually to the state's ambient monitoring program. And a lot of that comes from basically reduced staff time. The traditional method of monitoring fecal coliform and the traditional method of monitoring E. coli is more time consuming to conduct, whereas the newer methods are quicker methods and they're just easier to set up and get running. So that's the quick summary for that item. For the variances, there's no economic impacts expected because the requirements for the variances are established in the Clean Water Act. So any entity seeking to get a variance would already have to meet those requirements. The language that we're updating in this rule doesn't change any requirements. It doesn't introduce any requirements that don't already exist. So that gives us the rulemaking timeline. Obviously, we're here today, November 13th. If approved to go to the EMC, we would proceed to the EMC on January 9th to request approval to go out to notice public hearing. If that were granted, we would be able to file for the North Carolina Register publication January 27th of 2025. And then that would start the notice of text and public comment period beginning around February 17th, 2025, with public hearings held in April, with the end of the public comment period, the 60-day period being about April 18th or so. And if all of that were to go as scheduled, then we would likely be back to the EMC with the hearing officer's report in probably late summer, early fall. So the action item request today for the 2023 to 2025 triennial review is to request approval to proceed to the EMC, to request to proceed to public notice and hearing for the proposed 2023 through 2025 surface water triennial review and associated regulatory impact analysis. And that's all that I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Chris. Any questions from committee members? Commissioner Twitty?
Chris, I feel like you've probably covered this before, but the E. coli criteria proposes for Class B. What about Class C waters?
So Class C waters right now would remain as total coliform for secondary recreation. EPA currently doesn't have criteria specifically for secondary recreation. So right now we'd have to evaluate what an appropriate E. coli value would be for those waters.
Okay. Could I ask a second one, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
And this may be for Mr. Ventolera, maybe for the chair. I'm not sure who it's for. The items that were removed from this request rule or proceeding forward with this rule, the health exposure factors, health criteria, technical corrections, I know 1,4-dioxane, we're going to be talking about more in this committee. Can somebody tell me what's the statuses of those items? I think you said something like you're working on them, but is there more detail of where those are at?
Yeah, I don't know. Do one of you want to?
Since they were in litigation, again, I'm Julie Gribb, Deputy Director for the Division of Water Resources. But as part of the Asheboro permit, 1.4 was challenged based on our 208 regulations, and that went to litigation. And so as a result of the ALJ's ruling, right now, it's just on hold. And we have petitioned that ruling, but as of right now, moving forward, those rules apply to those standards, so it would be complicated to do at this time.
Tied to that litigation.
Okay.
Any others?
Council may need to help me clean this up, but that ruling applied directly to the Asheboro permit. Those permits not necessarily to everything.
Right.
Although if we pass this for everything, it could, that's the complication Julie's talking about. It could open all that back up too. So I think out of precaution, we just decided that was resolved. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you? Yes.
May I repeat all that again?
Please, because I think.
Okay, so that ruling applied to the Asheboro permit only. However, some of the things in there, if we were to pass this, could be raised on other issues as well. I think out of an abundance of caution, we've decided not to move on that until that process was finished on a legal perspective. We could blast on forward here and put it in here, but I think the department, everybody else has just said back off a little bit.
That's correct. Would you like to respond to any of that on the legal counsel piece?
No, I mean, I'm going to give a brief update on where the Asheboro case is in litigation and appeal tomorrow, but I think Chair Solomon's summary is correct, especially for our purposes today.
Any other comments, questions for Chris? If not, we have a request from the department to move on this today and request approval to proceed to the EMC. Public notice and hearing for the proposed 2023-25 surface water triennial review and associated regulatory impact analysis. So that's what's before us. What's the pleasure of the committee? I'll entertain a motion. Commissioner Ellison, yes, sir.
I move that the committee request, I move that the committee proceed to the full EMC to request to proceed to the public notice and hearing for the proposed 2023-2025 surface water triennial review and associated RIA.
No. Motion's on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Tim Baumgartner, thank you. Seconded. Any discussion? All those approve of this motion, raise their hand or say aye. Say aye. Those opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Are you opposed, Mr. Twitty? Commissioner Twitty, did you raise your? Okay, everyone, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is, do we have? Okay. I'm a little hesitant. We were expecting Secretary Mary Penny Kelly to come by and say hello to us, and wanted to make that available, that time slot available for her. And before we got into our discussion, we have two discussion items today, one on PFAS and the other one is 1.4. So dioxin. So I was hoping maybe she would be on her way or be close by so we could maybe ask her before we got into discussion.
Mr. Chair, she's running a little late, obviously, so I would suggest that we move on and we'll find some time when she gets here, if that's okay with you, sir.
Yes, sir. Very good. So that's a courtesy. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is discussion for let me get that. PFAS minimization plan concepts. Julie, thank you so much for coming today with this presentation. Please take your time with it. We've gone through this a lot over the last 3 weeks after the agenda was put together and it was presented to launched by DEQ and out to the public. And we've had responses from the public. We thank the public for responding. So we have this today presented, just a real quick update. We voted and the committee did in our last meeting in September that we did two things. We started with the human health benefits, PFAS in food, and anticipating a letter from the FDA. We have not, it's my understanding, we have not received that letter yet. But moving forward with the other part of our meeting was the PFAS monitoring and source reduction plans. So we're into that part now, and Julie is here to give us what their findings are thus far and to enlighten us where we may go from here. Thank you. Julie?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give you just a little summary of what the Chair Keene said on the September meeting. Okay. And then we'll talk about an example of a PFAS minimization initiative that one state did. So just to give you some ideas. And then we can talk about what the state of North Carolina might consider in their PFAS initiative to reduce and minimize PFAS discharges to state waters. And then with that, I'll need maybe some feedback, because with that, there's a lot of questions on how we might go about this program. So as the Chair Keene said, we'll focus on the second motion, and that is to direct the department to propose a draft rule and a draft RIA to establish monitoring for every industrial and NPDES permit and require PFAS source reduction plans as part of every industrial and SIU, significant industrial user, municipal pretreatment program, and probably should say permit after that. So the state of Michigan did a program on PFAS initiative on minimization. We're using theirs because they really have done a lot of work, really quite a significant amount. They did this long before EPA came out with its December 2022 memo that you should leverage pretreatment programs to go and address PFAS discharges. Michigan did it 4 years before they even came out with that memo. So it gives you an idea how far ahead of the game they are. So Michigan has what they call water quality value. It's equivalent to a water quality standard. So, but I'm going to use their term. So they established a water quality value for both PFOA and PFOS using toxicity information. I'll go into more detail on that in a bit. And they used the industrial pretreatment program in 2018, and they said for all municipal wastewater treatment plants with industrial pretreatment programs, you should focus on PFAS and PFOA and PFOS reductions. Okay, they used the facilities were having pass through of PFOS and PFOA, which is typical because they really don't treat for either of those parameters. Then they would require them to reduce and eliminate any sources. So as part of the initiative, the goal of the wastewater treatment plants, and again, why wastewater treatment plants? Because they are the control authority. The state of Michigan is the approval authority. Same way it works here. We're the approval authority. The POTWs are the control authority over SIUs. And so they asked the POTWs to identify all possible sources, to sample those sources, and then to start to require source reductions. Okay. They also asked the wastewater treatment plant to sample their effluents, so they could see what their levels were, and to submit reports and monitoring results as required. With direct dischargers, they did a similar type actions. However, the state was the control authority there directly over the direct industrial dischargers. Again, just to remind you, it's the significant industrial users are the industry that discharge to the POTW, and then they discharge to the streams, and then the MPDS dischargers are the direct dischargers that go directly to the stream. We write the permits for the direct dischargers.
Can I interrupt you with a question? How many direct dischargers do we have in North Carolina?
We have about 1,200, okay, direct dischargers, but most of those would not. So just like Michigan, they went to the POTWs that had pretreatment programs. They had 95 of those. In our state, we have about 153. We have about 104 that have a full program, and then we have some that is what's called a modified program. Okay. So we have 153. For major industrials, we have about 57 of those. And then okay, remember those numbers? Yeah.
Thank you.
So they started this in 2014, actually. But anyway, they had come up with a PFOA and a PFOS water quality value based on their Rule 57, which is very similar to our 208 rule and our 2B standards. Okay. And so they had numbers for both PFOA and PFOS. And then in February of 2018, they sent a letter to all the wastewater treatment plants that have pretreatment programs, because again, they're just trying to look at the industry that are discharging this NEPFOS. And they said, we want you to do initial screenings, we want you to do surveys, and we want you to develop a monitoring plan. And they said, submit your identification of sources and your monitoring plan to them within 4 months. And so they did that. And then they said, submit a summary report in 7 months that tells us what source monitoring you're doing, some of the results, what you're seeing in your effluent, and what actions you're recommending and working with these SIUs to take. In other words, BMPs, product substitution, campaigns looking at what their production, what's being produced at the plant, are they creating more PFAS, to start and look at all that and work with your SIUs to get reductions and help them and work with them to do PFAS minimization plans. Okay. And so they did this, and they said, here's your goal. In October of 2021, we're going to start to put limits and permits based on the water quality values. Okay. And so that's kind of their goal. I can tell you it's taken them longer to do that, and they found that there's a lot of work involved to address PFAS, but many of them have done reductions. They've just removed sludge that was just, they found if they didn't remove it, they just always had levels of PFAS that were always high. So they've done a lot of different things, and really Michigan has learned a lot. And they are now putting final numbers and permits, but it's just been a slow process for them. I'm going to skip to slide 9 and then go back to 6. Okay. On this slide, since the state decided to provide guidance to the POTWs on how you would implement this program. And it pertains to direct dischargers as well. If they have no PFAS and no PFAS, and they have no sources of it showing greater than 12, and the POTW is less than 12, they said, you did what we need to do, just keep sampling annually and show that it's not there. If you have sources that are greater than 12, but the POTW effluent is less than 12, in their case, they chose PFAS because it was a limiting factor, okay? They said, work with this SIUs to reduce PFAS. And if you want to develop local limits, you can do that and continue to monitor. They had semi-annual monitoring, but they moved to quarterly. And so that way you keep showing that you're protecting the streams. And then they broke a group down. If you have sources greater than 12 but less than 50, you must do source reductions at your SIUs. You should look at local limits and again, do quarterly and some of them monthly monitoring. And if you have PFAS greater than 50, then you need to do source reduction and monthly monitoring. So that's just how they set it up, because at some point you just have to tell some people they don't need to do it right, and you tell others to continue the program. So that's how they broke it down. How did they get to the numbers, the screening values that they're using? How they come up with these water quality values? Well, they incorporated their narratives process for developing water quality values for toxic substances within their surface water quality standards. They were not codified values, and they were derived for non-carcinogenic health effects based on toxicity information available at the time. These equations probably look familiar to you. Bridget and Chris come up here often with these equations. They're very similar to ours. Okay? The main difference being that Michigan used 2 trophic levels for the fish consumption rates and the concentration factors. I just want to be clear, if Michigan was to recalculate the numbers today, they would be different, okay? So back in when they did it, 2014, 22, they came up with 11 for drinking water, 12 nanograms per liter for non-drinking water for PFOS. And for PFOA, they recalculated them since 2014. In 2022, they had to recalculate them, and they came up with 66 for PFOA in drinking water and 170 in non-drinking water. The reason I bring this point up, and we'll see what Michigan does, it will be interesting. If they were to recalculate them today, giving today's reference dose numbers, that RFD value, they would be below 4. And that's why everybody goes to 4 then, the practical quantitation limit. Okay. So I just want to help you understand that PFOA has become just as important as PFOS. So this leaves us, that's the example of how Michigan did it. And when we think about how North Carolina might do it, there's just some questions that we struggle with that we need to get feedback from the EMC on. For instance, who will be required to monitor, and we can certainly help with all of these answers as well. Who exactly are we going to ask to monitor? Okay, who will be required to evaluate source reduction options and submit minimization plans? Okay, what levels trigger a minimization plan? In other words, what's that screening value? Michigan used 11 and 12. Okay. Would we use the same, what parameters would we choose? Okay. Would we use the same 3 that we use in the 2L standards? Okay. And what reduction targets ensure success? In other words, if you pick a screening value of a certain value, is the long-term success, though, to protect use designations, source pollution going to the drinking water? Would a long-term solution be 4? Because that's the MCLs, or just the long-term solution is the MCLs, right? In at least drinking water supplies or any discharges upstream of a drinking water supply. And what is the implementation timeframe? So these are really difficult questions, and these are the ones we need to develop an RIA, because you have to have constraints to do that. And so that, and then the last page, if anybody wanted to read about Michigan's program, they just have an enormous amount of data that you might be interested in looking at. And that's all I have.
Before we get into comments, questions for Julie and any of the staff, I want to make it for clarity, is that the chair of this committee has been reaching out to Richard and the staff to make sure that information is 2 weeks out and gets out on their website. So we have several conversations with DWR Director Rogers and Julie and Karen. Anything that is coming up, we get it 2 weeks out. We did that, and I have informed my vice chair that happens, and he's been a part of that as well, in case I'm not here. I say all of that to say this. These are just discussions. There's been no perception is there been no decision made from myself as chair or Director Rogers or Julie. We gave direction at our last meeting that we are going to follow a way-in, a process to include staff to give us what their thoughts are in direction. Michigan was brought up. Some levels were brought up, but here we are today that I, as your chair, has made it specifically clear that it's up to this committee to listen to this today and make a decision on how we plan as EMC to give them direction. They have asked me in the last week, and I have brought in EMC Chair J.D. Solomon to also be at the table when we are discussing how to move forward with this with these minimization plans and how to evaluate it and how to get the staff and EMC on the same page moving forward. So now it's going to be up to questions or concerns or anything for Julie and the staff. I just wanted to get that out on the table and make for clarity. Thank you. Now, questions, Commissioner Ellison.
So originally, DEQ wanted to regulate 8 PFAS. What is the cost to sample and analyze that suite of 8 PFAS, just for one round?
So that was in the original RIA with the other proposed one. I have to admit, I don't know the number off, but someone might be able to help me.
Approximately $400 per few. I would say.
Would you like to come up to the podium, please? Yes, thank
Stephanie,
you.
hold on. He wants the total cost for the
Yeah.
state.
I
Thank
know it
you.
was in there, but I don't have it with me either, so.
It's been a while, but I would say it's about $1,800 when we think about the all-in cost of staff time. The $400 is probably equivalent for state government. Negotiated rates for consulting, it's going to be a bit higher, so we use
Okay.
about $1,800.
That's what I was looking for, thanks. And what is the appropriate sampling frequency just for an initial characterization of a discharge?
Well, EPA has recommended quarterly for all the SIUs and the industrial direct discharges.
So, but that would be a monitoring schedule, right?
Yes.
Can that be compressed to characterize, or is the nature, the distribution of the discharged concentrations wide enough that you need that quarterly interval, or can you get a good characterization with weekly samples for 2 months?
Well, it is true that different campaigns that the companies run could result in different PFAS levels. So there is definitely variation. So I don't know that I can guarantee an answer, but you could compress it to get some quicker answers. Yes.
So
We have MC Chair J.D. Solomon here with us, who's ex officio member of the committee. That's a question.
yeah,
Comment?
well, just a comment, because, where we're trying to go. We talked about it, the bigger meeting, we wanted to do this for all industrials and all SIUs that went to pretreatment programs. We wanted the polluters to pay, so we want this to be on the industry's back, not the POTWs, not all the citizens of the state. It's got to be with whoever's giving it. To get to that point, what we had talked about was as you start this process off, you've got really 2 questions you're going to ask or 2 answers you got to have. Is you got to get the industry to answer the question in the source reduction plan, do you use PFAS? And there's a couple versions of that. They're going to say no, but you may find it in their waste stream anyway. They say may no, and you may not find it in their waste stream. They may say yes, and you may not find it in their waste stream, or yes, and they do find it in the waste stream. And so as we start off, if you start shotgunning everything at 40 and trying to do this over a long period of time, we could be here 3 years trying to figure out who's hot and who's cold. Most of what we've talked about in Michigan did that was PFAS is a good indicator. We could do more than 1. We could do 3. We could do 6, but I don't think we're talking about doing 40 because we want to identify the people that have PFAS first, which is going to be probably the 80-20 rule, only 20%, and we need them quickly to start minimizing. Now, we're not trying to solve the problem. We're not trying to engineer the problem in this phase. That's what we talked about before. We want to reduce, we want to identify and reduce. And so we put them in that category about you need to be reducing. And then they're going to be monitoring quarterly. Right? They may need to monitor more than quarterly. If they're really a bad player and they're going to do some real source reduction or some BMPs, you may want to see every month what they're doing. But that'll be in a different phase once they start moving into how do we get rid of the PFAS in general. So the people that kind of say no get kind of left alone, if you will. The people that say yes, or we find it there in an initial sample, even one sample, if they say I got it and it's in one sample, we don't need 22 years worth of samples. They've said they got it. And we got evidence they got it. So let's go ahead and get their minimization going. That was the initial thought process so that we can get the PFAS out of the water as quickly as possible. So that was one concept we played with. The other concept we played with was this: unlike Michigan, who kind of went through the POTWs and came around, they have an MOU with the state basically that says this is the delegated authority to run the program. I would like to see it on the top level to say whether you're a direct discharger or non-direct dischargers, you're required to do this. And so if we pass it on to the POTW, the burden's not on the POTW, it's back to those industrials. You have to do that as part of the program. Because we don't want people playing with the schedule either at a local level. We want everybody to be reducing PFAS as quickly as possible. Let's get it out of the water. And so that was the high-level concept of let's try to figure out a legal way that we could put that and require it of everybody and treat everybody the same, whether they're a direct discharger or an SIU discharging to a POD. We treat everybody the same. And that goal is to get rid of the PFAS, to eliminate the hazard. So that's kind of where we're going. And then as we get down the tree into the phase, what I'd call the phase 2 of the elimination plans, everybody's going to be a little different in size and composition. And so some people are going to say, we can remove the process, we can remove the PFAS, we can do some cleaning and other BMPs, or we can't do anything, we're stuck. And at that point, we've got to come up with some other solutions, but we don't know where they'll end up. We just know over a period of time, we want that PFAS to go to zero, ideally, or be minimized as low as they can do it. And we're trying to give those industries the opportunity to work with us as a state to do it on their own if they can see a way to do it versus being locked down to some number and they're being pinned in. But we want to see progress, and we want it as soon as possible. So there will be a cost that'll have to be in the RA to everybody for this sampling, but it'll be revealed when they do the RA. I think the Assistant Secretary said this too. This won't end in 3 or 5 years. Some of these industries will go on 7 or 8 years. But for our purposes, we want to see it minimized as quickly as possible. So it'll probably take them 1 year to get a plan together and get it submitted and approved, right? Some declaration in here. And then we should start to see that fall off over a 2 or 3 year period. So is it 3 years? Is it 4 years? Is it 5 years? It's under 5 years somehow. And we got to start with the worst offenders first. Last thing I'll say we talked about was what's the action level? And that's not a cleanup level. Don't get ahead of yourself. That's not an MCL or something that's the final cleanup level. It's how do you categorize these people as PFAS carrying or not PFAS carrying? And we've talked to a lot of different people that have used some multiple of the proposed MCL, because that's in legal court now too. But that number seems to be around 12, seems to be reasonable as a break point for getting more aggressive with some people than other people. So 12 could be your screening level. It could be 20. It could be 4. It could be a lot of numbers, but for talking purposes today, concept, probably 12 seems to be a good break point. And the state has some information where 12 seems to be a good number to start with, I think.
Well, and Michigan found that background was usually 2 to 7. And we have found that background's usually below 10. There may be a few exceptions, so we just want to recognize that, but we'll learn who they are by the sampling. But below 12 does seem reasonable.
Yeah. And with the background, that means the incoming stuff out of the water may be 7, right? So if you hold people to 4, you may put everybody in there and they're not guilty. But at 12, they say they got PFAS and they're over 12, they're going to get an aggressive plan. And if they want to come back and argue, the industry does, that our incoming water is 7 or 8, well, that's up to them to argue in phase 2. Yep. But you automatically failed the initial screening, so you're going to be more aggressively forced to minimize or find an engineer solution to get yourself out of that.
Right, so if it's above 12, it's likely they're producing some sort of PFAS.
Does that make sense in concept? Those are some of the discussions we've had. Because we don't want to come to y'all, and you guys don't know what everybody's done. They have studied it. Few of us have studied it in detail. Source minimization is not a new concept, guys. It doesn't apply just for PFAS. It's everything. So there's a couple ways you could skin the cat, but those are some high-level concepts we've talked about to bring back to you as a committee to start debating once you see it in writing. Fair enough?
Any follow-up? Commissioner Yarborough.
It makes a lot of sense. I commend you for all the work and the efforts you put in the last 2 months. We appreciate it very much.
Commissioner Ellison.
Back to the slide where Michigan had 66 and I believe it was 170.
That's correct.
Were those their original water quality values from their version of the narrative standard calculation?
That's correct.
Okay, and then
In 2020.
in 2022? Okay,
Oh,
and what are they now?
They haven't recalculated them.
But if they recalculated them, they would be a lot lower, right?
Yes.
They would be 11 and 12.
No, I didn't say
No.
that. Well, they are 11 and 12 for PFOS,
Okay, okay.
okay?
So when they got the 66 and 170, was that based on the lab technology available at the time?
It was, also I can say is, because I'm not the expert in this area, the only thing I can say is the RFD factor was significantly different than what it is today.
The RFD factor?
Yes, reference dose.
Right.
No, one thing I want to clarify too, I think that's important. You could look at this a couple different ways. You could look at this as an MCL level. You could look at this as what's a reasonable number by a formula. You could also look at what's reasonable by a program, by programmatic, right? So if we have 1,200 of these folks, I don't know how many you're going to do in a year, a third or half maybe, max. You're not going to all get plans in a year, but our intent is to get everybody to at least make a statement. Are you using PFAS? And to submit a sample so we can confirm that you are or you're not, right? So we're trying to get everybody. So this first level of screening doesn't get people off of the future regulations. If there's a when or if, or however you want to say it, there is a water quality standard or an MCL in drinking water. It is really to get us on a path to minimization and to get us as close to whatever that number is in drinking water. I think we could still go forward, we could go lower, but we got to get to a number eventually. But here is just to get people on the path so that we can start working with the biggest offenders first and holding them accountable to polluting our rivers, right? That's the first step. And so I don't think there's a magic in a screening number. It's not a regulatory number necessarily. It's just a way from a programmatic standpoint, we can attack the worst offenders first without getting into prolonged debates about what's coming in and all that mess, right? It's just to get to that number.
And of course, bringing those numbers up, those standards, going to have an influence on the economic impact, that the analysis that in the RIA that be brought out for, those POTWs that have to, SIUs, but certainly those downstream that has to take in what upstream is doing. And all that was indicated in our groundwater study. So that, again, is an important part of that SIU piece.
Right. And I don't think we're at a point on the RA we can solve how many people have to go how far on a whole across the state at this point yet. We don't know till we get the sampling done and get to watching people.
That's right.
But we can figure out what it takes to get people on a path to eliminate it at the cost of monitoring or some basic BMPs. And unfortunately, some of these people may not get there and they may have to do something else corporately or come back for an economic development grant. It's not our responsibility, but that's what we want. We want people to figure out a way to eliminate the hazard, not get around the hazard somehow, but we won't know those costs until we get into this program a little deeper.
Well, and I would suggest we start with the monitoring and build the results of that monitoring so that we can better apprehend the problem before we leap to solutions.
Right, and the reduction, because again, we've talked about reduction. How many years do we give people to eliminate or reduce it in this program before we get really aggressive on another program. In my mind, you've got to give them at least 2 or 3 years to implement some things and check it. But you can't give them 10 years. You got to give them 3, maybe 5 years, depending on how we structure the plan as far as paperwork's got to get done in this process too, so.
And let me add too, when you go out and grab and all of these dischargers, large and small, major and minor, we grab at one time so we can identify at one time. And we can help those indicators.
I would say you're going to have to do several samples at every facility for a certain period to be sure, not a lot, but enough that to be sure that you've kind of caught what's really in their waste stream. Again, a lot of these industries change their campaigns and what they're producing, and sometimes they just catch something else. But it doesn't have to be long, just enough to catch it.
A year, maybe.
Or even less.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Twitty?
I guess I'm surprised to hear it kind of the way it's been talked about is we need to start this monitoring now. Hasn't there been a lot of monitoring that's already been done to date with different dischargers through the permit process and things? Can we build off of that? Like if that data is already available for certain dischargers, certain locations, is that sufficient to build from that rather than starting at a square one? Which maybe that's not what's being proposed, but it's kind of how it sounds.
And honestly, statewide, it has not happened with the SIUs. It has happened quite a bit in the Cape Fear. We have a lot of data in the Cape Fear, and that's where the biggest impacts are going to be. But statewide, we really have not initiated a program. We do have a lot of data, and I can tell you what PFOA and PFOS is definitely in a lot of users in the Cape Fear. And a lot of POTWs have done effluent sampling. But we don't necessarily have a lot of SIU sampling. There's just some POTWs that did a lot of homework, like Burlington.
Sure.
Okay.
Can that be built off of?
That would be the intention, right? Especially if they know who some of the worst offenders are, let's say in the Cape Fear Basin already, and we can build off that and get right into the elimination or minimization aggressively. But others, if you look at statewide, which is what we do is statewide, are going to take maybe a little bit more time to get. But we would always focus on what we know and honestly what they declare, because they're obligated to declare that too anyway. So they're going to be declaring whether they're using PFAS or not, if they haven't already.
I would just,
Follow up?
yeah, I would just say I'm supportive of anything we can do. I agree with the concepts being presented here is a good step. And I think anything we can advance sooner than later is going to be a good thing. I know I receive and continue to receive emails daily from citizens across the state about the importance of this and the desire to get this done. So I think anything this committee and then the commission can move forward that will advance that is going to be a good thing. So I'm very supportive.
Thank you, Commissioner Twitty. Commissioner Ellison?
I'd encourage the department that as the data that we've got and we start building on that and we collect more data, as this process moves forward, we try to identify or sow some carrots rather than cutting up sticks for the regulated community. They're keeping them apprised of, as we're a long way from having a final rule done and implemented and all that. But I think because the existing data, who some of the sources are, we can let the regulated community know we're working on this. And if they can start like Greensboro did with 1,4-dioxane, right? Start to work, notify some of those SIUs of what's coming and what they're ultimately the types of things they're going to be responsible to do. Is that something you've got ongoing or?
So we are trying to work with the POTWs and put some PFAS monitoring in and ask them to look at their SIUs. I'm going to tell you having the EMC's backing on that would make all the difference because we don't have a state standard. And they don't know what to say to their SIUs as far as what level you're trying to get to, what screening level you're working towards. So they don't have guidance to provide to their SIUs if they find it as far as what to do.
So, for example, a resolution of the EMC supporting what we're talking about, would that be the kind of support that would be useful, or?
Yes, I think.
Without a rule, without a regulation?
I don't know how far it would, you would have to ask council. I don't know how far it would get without a rule.
Okay.
Okay.
But I would say you've got to start the rulemaking process to Commissioner Tweedy's comment. We need to get this moving sooner than later and let people know this is where we're going. And some will respond and some won't, but we got to start making progress.
Remember, Greensboro did what they did. They were under a special order by consent.
Understood.
Commissioner Deerhake, Commissioner Deerhake, please.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. Two comments about assuring that this is really an effective program. I wanted to make sure, first of all, that I offer this suggestion based on my experience working on as the ex officio on the Sedimentation Control Commission, that there is a very effective performance evaluation program in place for a delegation authority to the county and municipalities who have sedimentation and erosion control programs from the state. Comparably here, there's a delegated authority to the local governments for pre-treatment program. And I think to assure that this approach is applied effectively and consistently and fairly across all programs, that it would be important for the state to have a periodic, maybe every 2 to 3 year performance evaluation of each and every program to assure that they're meeting what's required of them to enforce at this SIU level. And then with the word enforcement, I wanted to make certain that I understood the intent of the concept, and does that include having some enforceability of a program such as this? When we talk about waste minimization, sometimes the sources may interpret that as voluntary, and I don't see how this program can be effective without there having some enforcement mechanism associated with it.
Right. And I certainly would hope they would be a stakeholder at the table, all of the groups within the state, as we mentioned before, Commerce and DOT and all the others, that as we move forward with this, they certainly be at the table with their thoughts as well. Any others? Commissioner Baumgartner.
This department used to have a stick, and I feel like we started with the stick instead of starting with the carrot. And I think this is, referring to Commissioner Ellis's comment, this is more the carrot. If those values are correct, that an industry or facility is looking at about $8,000 a year, I think as a facility, I'd rather pay $8,000 a year to do a monitoring and source reduction plan, and then I know there's ancillary costs between that, but instead of having a stick put on me, that I have to meet a certain standard. So I wish we had started this process a year ago instead of trying to get the stick out. We'd be a lot further down the road. And Julie, to answer your questions, I don't think anybody here can answer these 4 questions today. We appreciate the discussion about Michigan. My suggestion is that you guys put together what you think and let us take a look at it, and I don't mean shoot holes in it, but go through and talk about it and see what things we agree on and don't, and start cobbling together this plan and get it going.
Yes, Judge, to reiterate, this today is a discussion piece, Commissioner Baumgartner and the other committee members, is that we didn't intend for anything to happen today other than to take note, to discuss it, and to follow through into January with more in depth from the staff, that they understand where we want to go. And I certainly appreciate those comments. I certainly wish it happened a year ago as well, but we are where we are today, and moving through now. Are there any more questions or concerns? The staff does have a suggestion. They want to give that to the MC committee today. And if there are, from committee members, if there are no other questions for Julie? Comments?
I will
Okay,
add
Commissioner Derrick.
one clarifying point. The acronym BMP was used, but is there a distinction between that and BAT, Best Available Technology?
Sure. BMP are just best management practices, right, within the plant. Everything to do from where you store your chemicals, what chemicals you use, substitution. So that's, and removing sludge on a operational basis, on a routine basis, that's best for your operation and meeting the best limits that you can and optimizing those. BAT is best available technology, and often what we expect of industry, especially new ones coming in, they have to put in the best available technology to just provide the best treatment that they can. Okay, and that can vary from industry to industry and industrial type, because it can depend on the strength of the wastewaters. And a GAC treatment on one waste stream is going to be different than a GAC treatment on another waste stream.
Okay.
So,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner, is there any other commissioner comments?
I just
Wait
want
one
to
second.
ask one
Wait,
point.
wait 1 second. Any other, because I was going to try to finish up and ask you, Chairman Solomon, if you had any additional comments. But before I asked the staff from Richard's point, is that if he has suggestions to us, he shared that with me prior to the meeting as with you, but I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to finish their questions. Chairman Solomon. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the only part we've probably not mentioned or covered for y'all to give questions on. And again, I'll start by saying I'm the one that would like to start here first, but it will probably end up with more than one. PFAS to me is a good indicator. We can debate it. They can bring back arguments that PFOS is a legacy. It's for all the reasons we've talked about before. We could do more, we could do less, but PFAS would be that trigger I would look at first just to get the ball rolling. Now, as they do their sampling, they're probably going to use 1633 when they get approved. We'll see a lot of stuff. But just for initial classification, I think PFAS is the right one. I will tell you, staff probably would follow us in what we did on groundwater, which has no relevance to this necessarily to a screening method, but you could do PFAS, PFOA, and Gen X. You could do all three of those, or you could do just PFAS and PFOA like Michigan did. But I think it's still got to be, and this is just me speaking to the committee, I think if you get too broad, you're going to get into this complicated matrix of what things are. You need to keep it relatively simple to get the program moving fast. And we will discover people over time, but let's stay simple. But staff would probably prefer three. I would probably prefer one. I don't think it matters. They can bring us back both when they bring us back an RIA if you want to see 1, 2, or 3.
Okay.
Fair enough?
Yes, sir.
Fair enough. If I can add something, I'd like to.
Go ahead. You can get technical and talk about treatment technologies and all that stuff. I know. Go
Why
ahead.
would I add PFOA? Because we've learned that it's just as toxic as PFOS. Michigan didn't know that back then. Okay. So, and we have some dischargers just have PFOA, so we would catch those. Those are the legacy compounds, and most detrimental to your health. So that's why I would include it.
That's fine.
Why would I include Gen X? Because the biggest discharger in the state would not be affected by these regulations if we didn't include Gen X.
Now, the argument I've had is I've been under all kind of regulatory actions for 8 years now. So why do they need it? But apparently we still need, I don't understand why we would still need
have
to
it
track
come-
down Gen X from Chemours because we've been at them for 8 years. I don't.
Because we don't have a state number. So this would, as even the screening value, something would help.
Good. Thank you for your input, Chair Solomon. Any others? Okay, I would like to entertain to the committee that Director Rogers bring to this committee what his thoughts are and how to move forward and how we can move forward into our January meeting. He has that prepared. He handed that to me prior to the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I think after hearing the discussion with the committee, in listening to y'all's thoughts, that we'll have staff develop a PFAS minimization initiative for major and minor industrial direct dischargers to surface water and all significant indirect users that discharge to publicly owned treatment works. The minimization initiative will require monitoring for PFAS, and implementation of minimization activities required to eliminate or significantly reduce discharges of PFAS to less than 12 parts per trillion over a 3 to 5 year period. So the idea here is next committee, we will come forward, provide this information, how we would implement that type of plan, and then we'll open it up for discussion and debate from the committee, just to have something to go from and begin with.
Commissioner Ellison.
Where did you get the 12 parts per trillion?
We got it from Michigan on their PFAS, was 12 parts per trillion. Again, this number can be what you want it to be. We've had discussions with Chair Keene and Chair Solomon about that, and that seemed to be the number that we came down on.
Do we need to set a number before we get any data?
This is just the targeting number that allows us to weed out those that are less than 12. They're out, and then the ones that are above 12 will proceed and continue monitoring and development minimization plan.
Okay. At this stage, perhaps that's adequate for moving forward, but I'd like a better understanding of where the 12 came from. If it just came from Michigan, we're not Michigan, and that may not be the best number for North Carolina.
Yeah. And I think that's the start, right? And I think there's up for more discussion there as well.
Commissioner Deerhake.
Just
Yes.
to make sure I understood correctly, you said PFOS and PFAS, but then I just heard a moment ago Deputy Director Gribb say PFOA, PFOS, and Gen X.
Again, that is, we can include that if the committee wishes. And again, it's up to the committee on what they want to include related to the parameters to monitor and assess on.
Do you have that printout that you could put up on the screen just for?
I don't have it available for put on the screen. We
Would you have a copy that each committee member could have?
can make copies. I've got one here, so.
So exactly which congeners or however you want to phrase it, which specific chemicals are you talking about again? And what you just proposed?
For the minimization plans, and the trigger for the less than 12 is the PFAS.
PFOS.
PFOS, yes.
Only. And Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I ask how representative you think PFOS is of the other congeners or constituents, whatever you want to call them?
Again, I think there's different
Class.
opinions on that, and I think PFOS has been used as the targets because it also, when you treat for that, you also eliminate other PFAS as well, is one of the reasons that we're looking at that. As Julie just mentioned, PFOA also is a problem. And, I think if we had our druthers, we would like to move forward with PFOA, PFAS, and Gen X. But again, that's up to the committee to discuss and decide on how to move forward with that. I think our initial would be for Gen X, it would be less than 10 parts per trillion, and then the screening level, and then PFOA would be the 12 parts per trillion as well.
So you've revised your recommendation to have all three or not?
I'm not making a recommendation. I'm making a suggestion on how we need to move forward.
Yeah.
We need the committee to tell us what you want us to do, is what we're looking
And in
for.
deference to, we've talked
ahead.
about this,
Chair.
I know that PFOS captures almost everything. It's a good first indicator. I've not seen the data. Julie says they've got somewhere people just use PFOA, or maybe that's at a landfill or an industry. I don't know. they can bring back that data next time. I think they just don't want to waste their time tracking down 3 if we only want 1, or if we don't need to get too wide too fast, in my opinion, just like we don't need to get locked in on a number too early, but we need to give them some guidance.
Commissioner
So
Drake?
so I might
Commissioner
suggest
Jake.
then that if PFOS is the starting point between now and the next meeting, then as you suggested, Chair Solomon, that they also let us know the prevalence of PFOA
I would agree with that.
and Gen X in other facilities.
Right, sure. I agree with that.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Now, Assistant Secretary Mazemore,
Yeah, I was just
We-
going to
we-
add a little bit insightful into that conversation.
okay.
You mentioned drinking water systems as a recipient of this water. You know, we have tested almost all of the major drinking water systems, and you've heard about that data, the community-based systems as well as the public water systems. If you look at what's in those measurements data as an indicator of what's in our waters, we are seeing PFOS and PFOA as the 2 primary pollutants that are triggering the MCLs. Gen X is also present in a few, but not that many. And that's the reason I think Julie and Richard were suggesting those 3, because that's what's in our drinking water supply.
Thank you. Being that you are up there already. Y'all sit down so quickly. Got something for you to do for us. We have a special guest today. I'd like you to introduce her, please.
Yes, sir. I would like to introduce our Secretary, Mary Penny Kelly, to the committee. She would be interested in saying hello.
Please, welcome.
Hi, I've come to each of the committees so far and met some of you already and know some of you from the past, former Diener employees at the time. So it's good to see good faces, and it was wonderful to have one really big issue already out of the way on the agenda. So nice to come in a little bit late on that. And Julie Gribb is fantastic. Julie, amazing. It's hard to keep all those acronyms straight. I've had several briefings, and I applaud all of you for the work you're doing here at the committee, taking up such serious issues and really getting down to the weeds and understanding it's all in the details. Appreciate this approach. It seems like we're making progress, which was one of my hopes at this meeting, that we would move forward and start gathering some more data with the hopes that we will keep our citizens protected while at the same time keeping our economy healthy. So I really appreciate all the work you're doing. I know we've got another issue coming up, right? Another heavy hitter. So I'll sit around and would love to observe your work, but did want to say hello, introduce myself, and commend you all for all the time and effort you give to this commission and to the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary
You'll be with
Kelly.
us tomorrow too. I think you've got a lot of people here, so you'll be with us tomorrow too.
Yes, yes. And tomorrow I'm going to focus on Hurricane Helene and all the good work our staff is doing out there that relates to the work you do here at the commission.
I understand that'd be a great report.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Getting back to the discussion now, wrapping this one up, and Director Rogers, I really wish that we had a copy of what that was that you read. Give us some further insight.
We'll
clarity.
make copies and circulate it, and while you're hearing the other item, all of you will get in front of you. How's that sound?
Okay.
And then if there's any questions, we can come back to it. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, but I just wanted to make sure that the staff understood that the committee is either all in or not. And certainly it was not an action item, but more of an information and discussion item to get so much of this out, to give you some direction, some leeway of how to come back in January. So it's the pleasure of the committee. If you want to submit a motion that we move forward or with no specifics other than what the director has asked us. And that's why I was hoping that we could just get the narrative right before we move from this to the 1.4. Commissioner Ellison.
I think these 4 questions are critical for, and as Commissioner Baumgartner mentioned, that the department come forward with some answers. Now, this piece that Secretary Rogers read to us answers some of those questions, but not all of them, and it doesn't really give a basis for the answer. So I'm concerned. I don't want to rush to failure. Okay, I think we should just continue on a steady, well-informed path. So I would not be in favor of a motion to pursue this any further.
Okay.
Especially when we haven't seen it and, had time to cogitate on it.
So Mr. Chair, I do ask that you tell us how to proceed, or the committee tell us how to proceed, because I'm getting some messages here.
Commissioner Yarborough.
I think that's a fair question, and I would be a little bit on the other side of, I think we do need to give them some direction. They've come back to us with some reasonable response to our questions in the past, and I think it's not unfair to ask for us to give us some guidance on how to proceed.
Commissioner Baumgartner.
The question of how to proceed is 3 versus 1. Is that what you're asking, or you're asking all 4 of these questions?
I think, it might be better if we come back around, we can get this in front of everybody so y'all can look at it, because it does address who's going to be required to monitor. It addresses a threshold from which will guide the monitoring, who will stay in the monitoring plan, who will not. And then it also gives a time frame. So I really think it addresses most of the questions up there, but we can circulate it. We can come back to it if you're willing to do that, Commissioner King, and have a little further discussion on it after the presentation on 1.4
We will not move forward on any of this until we all see what was presented to me and Chair Solomon before the meeting. And I understand there was some discussion about some of these people, some of these purposes to require monitoring and just not monitor, but to require it. And also the implementation required to eliminate. I mean, I think that word eliminate was the right word to use instead of just required or significantly reduce discharges. But the eliminate part, I think is the right word there, is to do away with it.
I just want to clarify.
But the 12 parts came from, the Michigan piece, and that's to be determined. And so is the economics of the cost of those who aren't in compliance. So all of these are in play, but I was hoping we could get something to the committee today so we could bring something back in January.
Yeah, and I think they're going to get copies for you, for the committee, before we get out of committee today.
I would like to do that.
Yeah, but he's talking about going to 1.4 docs and before
And I
we.
would really, with technology the way it is today, I would really not want to go to 1.4 until we get this out of the way. Commissioner Deerhake.
So while we're waiting on that, just to make sure we are all clear on what we're discussing here, are we discussing a screening study? Or when we talk about the concept, are we talking about a screening rule or some sort of rule concept that would be coming back to us at the next meeting?
The committee last meeting made a motion that we go into a monitoring piece. And that monitoring piece is source reduction and to eliminate this chemical from SIUs or from the POTWs, more or less. So that motion was made by the committee. And I don't think this is a concept. I think it's real. I think it becomes a preliminary, and I hope it becomes a final. And I hope it happens sooner than later. It is important that this committee, I think this committee understands that. So, but there's a process, and that's what we're doing today. Instead of coming out with, and the department was very aware of what happened at our last meeting, with food being a big piece of it, and agriculture being a huge piece of it. Now the monitoring piece and the cost is going to cost upstream and downstream, major industrial dischargers. It's there, but this is a process, so it's not a concept. This is something that is real. So, but I want to make sure the committee members are clear on it as we move forward. So the staff don't spin their wheels. And then they come back and say, well, that's not what you told us to do, or that's not the direction we took because we weren't told that. And we wasted a lot of time, and we don't have that kind of time to waste. So yeah, let's get this taken care of. Hopefully now we can get this before us. Would you like a recess?
Yes. Yes.
Let's go for a 5-minute recess, please. Meet back in 5 minutes and we get this information before everyone. Thank you. Director Rogers, and we'll call this back to order and go over and discuss this suggestion that you and your staff would like to make.
We have a copy, we made copies of what was initially read. And as discussion went on, I think the only change is that PFOA and Gen X were added to the statement, as well as levels, which means the screening level is to be determined. So that we don't have the 12 parts per trillion out there, less than 12 parts per trillion.
But you've added the PFOS, PFOA, and Gen X levels.
Again, we'll do that, and my thoughts are we'll provide levels, an example, or provide a level, make the statement of why it's there, provide the numbers and impacts for PFOA and Gen X, and then the committee can make determination on what they want to move forward as we discuss and debate at the next committee meeting.
Any discussion from committee members? Commissioner Deerhake.
Thank you. I still just need one thing clarified, and that's the third from the bottom line. You use PFAS, you say monitoring for.
So we'll be
PFAS.
monitoring for PFAS. In other words, we'll be doing monitoring for the PFAS.
Multiple species.
Multiple parameters. And then the actual levels that we'll use for in or continued monitoring or not continuing monitoring will be determined as well, which we used as an example of less than 12 parts per trillion earlier.
Commissioner Ellison.
So you've got eliminate or significantly reduce over a 3 to 5 year period. Okay, I think eliminate is pretty clear. Significantly reduce is going to have to be defined. And what determines whether it's a 3-year period or a 5-year period? Is that going to vary between dischargers, or is that to be worked out after we get data, or what?
I would think it would, both of those, quite frankly, depending on the discharger and how the data comes in and what they have to do in order to meet the screening levels that are.
So what are you asking? I mean, we've got this, which is different from that. And what are you asking us to do?
This is just for the division and the department to pull together a presentation on this. It will be similar to what Michigan has implied. We'll come up with a plan about how we would implement this with this, and then that's what we'll discuss at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Deerhake.
So does the word initiative mean an unregulated study, or does it mean some sort of a regulation or rule that requires these facilities to do the monitoring?
I think in the end, we will propose that we move forward with rulemaking on this plan so that it is enforceable and that we can move forward with it.
The monitoring is enforceable?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
But knowing how and what the monitoring piece would be economically is to be determined, and that would not come back as a directive or an order, not an order, a directive or an ask from your department next January.
Not in January, but obviously we'd have to go through that process in order to get a rule in place. Absolutely.
That would be part of the, fiscal note, yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, as far as the enforceability of the monitoring program, would the burden for that, for the SIUs be on the delegated authority POTW for enforcing that? Or is the enforceability burden on the state?
That would be part of the discussion piece in January. That's part of their work order to come up with ideas on how they would enforce that. That question did come up, what if they don't comply? We're not going there yet. Don't know. You just, but it's part of being out of compliance. And if you are remissions or whatever, how do you, we don't know that yet. But that's part of maybe phase 2 or 3, but we certainly have to get off the diving board here and get in the water. Yeah.
And that sort of moves into the idea that I had about making sure that the delegated authorities are operating consistently amongst them and fairly, so that all of them are enforcing monitoring
That's right.
across the board.
Yes.
So-
Yep. We talked about, again, going out and grabbing immediately everyone and finding out who and who is not. So that's part of your work, the work plan.
The point is well taken, Commissioner.
Yep. So are you comfortable as a committee to, if the narrative or the part of giving them instruction, do you want to spell it out specifically to feel better about where we're going after today into January? For the staff to know where they need to go from here. Commissioner Baumgartner.
I think Director Aldridge, you're looking for a nod. I think we can all nod on this. Myself, as far as I'm concerned,
Yep.
I don't think we really need a motion. Let's just move forward and get going.
Okay. How many nods do we have? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think you're good to go.
We could just look for consensus. How about that?
Okay.
Consensus.
Consensus. Thank you. Okay, next, let's move on to 1.4 Dachshund. Again, the secretary, Kelly told me she would be around for this one, so thank you. Maybe it won't take so long, but thank you for being a part of it. It's very important for us. Julie, you're up again. Thank you.
So I thought I'd bring up something less controversial. Oh, no. Oh, okay. So final report on 1,4-dioxane in the Cape Fear Basin and the path forward. Why am I doing this report? Because the Greensboro Special Order by consent actually had a settlement agreement. Part of that settlement agreement, we had to keep you informed as to what all our studies and actions were in the Cape Fear on 1,4-dioxane, specifically with Greensboro and other facilities. I'm calling this the final report, that you can always ask us for more. It's just what is needed out of the settlement agreement. We had to do a final report. That would be this one right here. Why is it just a simple PowerPoint? Because really nothing has changed since January, our written report in January of beginning of this year. Okay, and then we just updated it in July verbally. And now we're just really going to restate some of the things we restated in all the other reports, except for one slide, which you'll see. So that is why I'm here to do this. Greensboro has made significant reductions of 1,4-dioxane in their discharge. The SOC did a great job. A 1,4-dioxane limit was put in the ASHRO permit. That was contested. I'll go into more detail on that in a minute. Okay. And so we are talking about a total of 6 facilities that really have 1,4-dioxane at levels that we're concerned with. Only 4 at elevated levels. 2, if we were to put a permit limit in their permit today, they're very close to meeting it, just so you know the pool of facilities that we're talking about. So in March of 2021, the EMC approved a 2-year SOC for the city of Greensboro that was later petitioned, and then it was renegotiated, and it was approved by the MC on November of 2021. And the difference was, instead of really 2 phases, it had 3 phases to bring the levels of 1,4-dioxane down in the TZ Osborne discharge. So you can see the main number there is the last year for TZ Osborne to reach 23 micrograms per liter of 1,4-dioxane. The SOC expired in July of 2024. Greensboro submitted their end of the year or end of the SOC report, just for general information, they took over 602 1,4-dioxane samples during those 3 years, and they spent over $77,000 in commercial lab testing alone. All the data and reports are on the Greensboro website. Greensboro has not exceeded the SOC compliance value since year 1. They have not exceeded the 23 that I'm aware of at all. Conclusion, the SOC was effective and helped the city to identify significant industrial users and take pretreatment actions to reduce 1,4-dioxane concentrations. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So the SOC, the year 3 ended. And just so what is happening now, I thought you would be interested to know, the city continues to do post-SOC voluntary actions that are similar to its year 3 requirements. In other words, it's continuing to do weekly effluent grab samples of 1,4-dioxane. They will report within 24 hours to DEQ and notify any downstream utilities if they should have a sample greater than 23 micrograms per liter. The city continues to maintain its pretreatment program mechanisms that modify permits as necessary and require select SIUs to collect and retain daily samples of 1,4-dioxane. Why is that so important? If they see a large value or elevated value in their effluent, they immediately go back to those SIUs, requiring to test those samples they're doing daily and see who was the cause. It's been very effective. And the city will continue the following sampling and monitoring activities as listed there. You can see there, it's quite extensive. And now I'll talk about the City of Asheboro's permit. The City of Asheboro's permit was issued in August of 2023. It was appealed. The ALJ made a ruling that required us that the 1,4-dioxane limitation in the permit is void and unenforceable, and that all other conditions of the permit are effective. As a result, what we are required to do when that happens, it's a major permit, we are required, and we did this on October 7th. We sent, as part of our MOA with the EPA, we had to do what the judge said, but we had to send that revised permit to the EPA for their concurrence. Okay. On October 13th, DEQ filed a petition for judicial review and a motion for stay in the Wake County Superior Court disagreeing with the ALJ decision. Since I made this presentation and had to get it 2 weeks ago, since then, on October 31st, EPA responded with a general objection to the revised permit. They stated that the revisions may not be consistent with the Clean Water Act, which requires NPDES permits to include effluent limits as stringent as necessary to meet state water quality standards. They said pursuant to the MOA that allow 90 days for EPA to supply the specific grounds for the general objection, if any, they have till January 6, 2025.
Let me stop you, Julie, for a second.
Okay.
So I know council, I've asked council to include this in a report for tomorrow.
Okay,
I know
I just
this is a
spoke.
legal proceeding.
That's right.
It's not related to the Greensboro SOC, and I just want to make sure Julie and staff are comfortable not going too far. We're going to share what we've got that's in the public record, but I did ask council to do more on Asheboro tomorrow that we felt like we could do in detail. So
Thank you, Chair Solomon. I just went over that with legal and showed her that response and agree with you. Let legal
Okay,
take
yeah,
care of
I'll
it.
let
Yes.
legal
Thank you.
take care of this. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll just finish because these are just, you'll see it in the letter, just, where we stand currently with EPA. EPA continued that at that point in January 6, 2025, if they should give us specific grounds for their objection, any interested party may ask for a public hearing. If a hearing is not held and a revised permit addressing their objections is not submitted, then EPA becomes the exclusive authority to issue the permit. And that's just how it would work. It would go to the EPA then. And during that time, a final MPDS permit may not be issued until completion of the objection process is finished. And so, they did send a copy of that letter to the permittee as well. So that's kind of where we stand on the Ashboro permit at this point in time. So as you know, we have done, tried to go forward with the triennial view with the 1,4-dioxane numerical standard. We also learned that the collaboratory was going to do a report. Since then, we have received a report. We can, of course, proceed and incorporate the collaboratory findings into our rule package if you would like. That's one option. Okay. Or we're looking for guidance on this too. This is as complicated as PFAS, right? So it kind of takes us to the same stage, proceeding with the numerical value for 1,4-dioxane. And of course, what we really need and what we're concerned about is source control. Right? It's the same type of thing. It's an emerging compound. We need source control. We need to address SIUs. Probably not, we don't see it statewide. We really know what facilities we're talking about and where the action needs to be taken. So it could be a much more limited process. But again, we have struggled with this and we are looking for guidance from the EMC on this and the Water Quality Committee. And that's all I have.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm glad you broke that out like that. Any questions for Julie? Comments?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
I have one, Mr. Chairman, just to make
Chair
sure I'm
Solomon.
clear. One of the reasons we brought this before the committee today is I think it's required in the SOC that after the Greensboro SOC is complete, that staff brings us recommendations. It doesn't say whether we have to act on them or what we have to do with them. But notwithstanding any discussion we had on triennial review or Ashboro permit, the Greensboro SOC requires, my understanding,
That's correct.
that they report on the Greensboro SOC and any recommendations they have from the Greensboro SOC for our consideration. And so our consideration could be any of the things they put up there related to what they found at Greensboro. But as Julie said, source minimization or source elimination, something in that realm is probably in order with monitoring at this point. I think what will make it different and difficult, and I think we've seen that, is it's very difficult to get 1,4-dioxane out at scale still. We may have ability to get PFAS out easier in some ways than we do 1,4-dioxane for a treatment technology. So we're still maybe a couple years away from that to say, let's just eliminate it with an engineered solution. We may be back into the bat, Commissioner Deerhake, more than just BMPs or some treatment technology will solve the problem at scale. And I think the problem we've got is twofold. We like to talk about the SIUs and the POTWs, but we do have at least one or two direct dischargers that use 1,4-dioxane. So we can put that in their permits and we can put control technology there. But again, in my way of thinking, like we do with PFAS, we ought to treat all potential polluters the same way, whether they're part of a POTW or whether they're just independent dischargers. We need to sample and reduce as much as we can, and then figure out if they can eliminate. But we need to eliminate the hazard of putting 1,4-dioxane in the rivers, whatever that means and to what level, we'll figure that out. We need to eliminate it if possible.
Would you put the last slide up, please, that you had before that one? Yes.
I will let you know that Ashboro, just during the last 2 months, has not only exceeded the 0.35 or caused an exceedance of narrative standard in the downstream water supplies, it's probably exceeded 35 as EPA's recommended health advisory for 1,4-dioxane. They had a discharge of 540 micrograms per liter in November 1st and a discharge of 570 micrograms per liter on October 18th.
Commissioner Deerhake.
I just thought as we were closing out the Greensboro topic that we'd like to acknowledge the people from Greensboro.
Sure, that
here.
would be great, since they have done a lot of work, that's for sure.
Do we have those here?
Let's see, we have Alicia, right? And then we have Marty Groom, and we have Elijah Williams. And your titles have changed on me. You're gonna have to retire. Okay. And I think Elijah is the lead of all this pack coming here, so.
Yeah. So how does the committee would like to, here again, staff is asking for us to give them some direction here. And it's ironic that PFAS and 1.4, though different, they're starting to parallel where the staff department is having to do a lot of research and do these cross over. I think if my understanding is that it's been some time ago where the EMC and Chair Solomon is wanting to take 1.4, and we took it out of triennial, or the triennial. We took that out, and here we go with this paralleling the PFAS piece. So, but my thoughts now, since the judicial piece or the litigation piece that is come before us in the last couple of weeks, then I don't want to get too far out. So I was going to ask legal to maybe give us some response on. I don't want to get too far out with the 1.4 if this is going to line up with what is now in this process. How far do we go with 1.4 or asking the department?
Yeah, I don't want to interject on the chair of the committee, but I really wanted legal to talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. And I do think Ashboro is one that'll cross in front of us. But our main path is again, how do we reduce or eliminate 1.4? And I think that's a issue that's under judicial review for a specific facility, not for Greensboro, not for anybody else. So I just want to be careful we don't let that shade our solving of the big problem with getting wrapped up in something that may cross in front of us. We have not been briefed on Ashboro as a commission as a whole through this whole process. That's been going on for 2 years, and we've really not been briefed on it. So I don't know why now it would reshape our thinking. We need to reduce or eliminate 1.4 is what we're trying to do.
Yes.
So
Got you. Okay. Committee members, any thoughts? Commissioner Baumgartner.
So we're commenting on this slide. Is that what we're commenting on right now? Make sure I've heard
Yes, so
Ashboro and Greensboro.
The path forward, yes, is what and you don't have to, it's just something to think about. We presented a numerical standard. We were going to go back and come back with the numerical standard as part of the triennial review. We took it out for now, but we still could come back with that. I don't think there's anything in the court proceedings stopping us from coming back with a numerical standard. However, could take a different path too and look at minimization and reduction, which you would do even if you have a standard, right? But
So you said this would not be statewide. Would it be concentrated? How many facilities are you talking?
well, I guess I should say it would apply statewide, but with all our research and testing and sampling, there's 6 affected facilities at this time.
6 facilities.
Across the entire state.
Yeah.
Committee's kind of given guidance on, well, not kind of, we did give guidance on PFAS earlier. Start with source protection and go from there. I don't see why we would deviate from that at all. So, I mean, as one member of the committee, my opinion, I know opinion like feet now probably all stink, but My opinion is, yeah, we go by the same path of source reduction and then start a numeric standard from that, depending on how all these court cases and litigation unfolds.
So you're suggesting that perhaps we come back with a minimization plan for 1,4-dioxane as well?
We're talking about 6 facilities, so yeah, it seems pretty cut and dry and simple. And maybe I'm oversimplifying it.
No, I don't think so. You're doing great.
Commissioner Derrick.
I think in this case, with this particular compound, minimization is already inherent. It's already a part of it as you work through the existing permits. The question is what the number is that's going to be enforced. And we have a narrative number, and we've been asked to make that a numeric number. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
yes.
this minimization is a natural progression of this whole process through the permitting, the SIU programs, et cetera, was demonstrated with the Greensboro SOC. So am I expressing that correctly? Is it?
Yes, well, anytime we have a numerical standard and that they can't reach it the minute we put in the permit, we have to do a compliance schedule to get them there.
Right.
Yes.
If I may
Commissioner
take the
Ellis.
exception that we probably don't know. We know for Greensboro because they did 609 samples or whatever they've done.
Mhm.
I don't think for all the other POTWs or the direct dischargers, we have that detailed information on what their discharge of 1,4-dioxane is. And so to me, we are getting it ahead of the horse if we start putting a numeric standard out in the surface water body and don't really understand what Greensboro has found. And you're familiar with that. It took them a few years to figure out what all their SIUs had. But that's where a source minimization approach with monitoring would help us identify everybody and what levels they're at before we really thought about a numeric standard.
If I may,
Yes.
I think Greensboro was probably the most complex challenge of all the communities that have the 1,4-dioxane, probably because it's the largest and they had the most SIUs. I don't know whether that's correct. I think that's the impression I got. When you moved to someone that was at Burlington or Reedsville, they basically eliminated their problem with one facility, right? When that facility either changed its raw materials or ceased operation. I'm not sure what happened there.
So each one has a different case. You're correct. I mean, so I would say a couple of them still have not really done a full assessment of their SIUs, but some of them know that there's only 2. So
Right.
it really varies across the board. I think the main concern here is what the POTW struggle with is getting to the low limit that is required as part of the numerical standard that we developed. And the concern is that really achievable? And is there a way for the EMC to give them a different value, I guess, to achieve in the meantime until the other value can actually be achieved, perhaps?
So would that be treated as an interim number as opposed to a final number?
Or a target number that I would say was similar to PFAS right now. We're still looking for that final number for treatment, but we may have a trigger number of, I'm grabbing a number, 10 or 5 or something for 1,4-dioxane that we start working source minimization to say, you do have a problem. How far we take it down may take us a couple years to get to, but that shouldn't stop progress of taking the number to 0. And I think that's what the department's been trying to do. But we could codify that into some kind of rule to make them sample and identify and start that reduction process till we get a more concrete number or wherever that would be.
Regardless, I mean, the fact that we have a narrative number on the books already, it's already the obligation of the delegated authorities to investigate SIUs, correct? To make sure that they comply. So as I said earlier, it's already built in. It's inherent into the program, I think, already. It's just a matter of whether or not the commission wants to set an interim or, as you say, a targeted number.
Yeah, for source reduction.
Yes. Commissioner Ellison.
I'm all for getting the hazard out of the river, and source reduction and all that. That's a good approach, but the committee should remember that some of the science behind the numbers put forth by the department last year, I guess, was questionable, and that animal studies originally cited in some of the early documentation provided to the committee by the department were grievously flawed. And then they've got statistical contrivances to set limits. So the point I'm getting at is the number is going to be very hard to get at. And as Chair Solomon said, the treatment technology and options are different for 1,4-dioxane than they are for PFAS. So again, I'm not in a hurry on this, and I think we need to work hard to come up with whatever the right numbers are going to be.
Is my understanding is that 1.4 is not regulated by the EPA. Is that correct?
And again, it depends on where it is, but PFAS isn't either, right?
That's right.
So there's
I know
there's
that,
no
but I
standard
just
to go
want-
back to per se. I think we, though, can make a very clear statement with some trigger level, action level, source reduction and monitoring that we don't want any more 1,4 in the river than we need or we have now, that we want it to go this way, not this way.
Right.
I'm pointing up. We want to go down.
My
And
question
so I
was,
think that's could be where the action is with this level. It's not trying to get to the scientific level. It's to where we require people to start eliminating it or minimizing it is what I'm trying to get to. And
yeah.
let them see how low they can go.
Yeah, my question was driven by the last bullet point on the focus for source control is what you have mentioned a few minutes ago, Chairman Solomon. And what Commissioner Ellison had suggested that when we put the agenda together and this was launched, we divided it in these two categories, two lanes here. And the bottom is define reduction targets. And that's what you go back to, Commissioner Deerhake, about what are those targets? What are those numbers? And if there's something already in place, then is it the right number? So, I mean, that's what that was sort of leading to the question is that last one, defining reduction targets to ensure end users that protection of downstream users. And that's, you know, that has been a source of heartache for a lot of those who are having to deal with that and the economic piece and what it's going to cost and what is in compliance and what's not. So those are the numbers that I think we're trying to get to as well. Commissioner Ellison.
What is the standard that you put to the committee before when we were looking at a rule?
The standard we put forward was 0.35 micrograms per liter in drinking water supplies.
And what's the PQL?
1.
Any other questions, comments? Here again, they're looking for some direction, path forward. Commissioner Baumgartner.
And again, I mean, the source control, start with source control, and we begin developing a numeric standard, just like we're doing with PFAS. That's to me guidance, I guess, and what you're looking for from the committee. Go ahead and start this source control plan, put it in front of the committee, go ahead and start it on rule. At the same time, just like PFAS, we're working on a numeric standard to codify and develop through rule.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Baumgartner. Do you have anything to add from the staff? I got the letter on the PFAS piece right before the meeting. So is there anything out there that we need to see before we move on to 1.4?
No, I think I've updated you unless someone else had something to add.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good presentation. Again, this committee is doing committee work in the committee to get it to Chairman Solomon and DMC. And we're hoping that we can move forward in January and this may take a little longer. This may take a little longer, but I think this is a good process to move forward. Any other questions for Julie or staff before we move out of this? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll wrap this meeting up with these two discussion points then. I'd like to ask Director Rogers to come up and give us sort of a briefing overview and your department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have comments. I'll reserve those for tomorrow, the full EMC for my director's comments. I appreciate y'all's work and input today. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Yarborough.
Commissioner Baumgartner said that he agreed, but did any of the rest of us? So did we push that through, or is it just assumed so?
Yeah, I think what we're
Can we get a
planning.
nod? Is that what you're looking?
Not for them.
If that's, I mean, if that's the consensus of the committee, going on your question, Commissioner Durhake.
Consensus doesn't necessarily mean unanimity, but I hear what the consensus is saying, so.
Thank you. Okay. Now. Any commissioners have, any committee members have any comments? I have one like to ask, closing. It was mentioned a while ago by Commissioner Twitty that he received several emails. Other committee members have let me know the same thing. They've received many emails. My inbox is blown up as well as your chair. But I am like Commissioner Yarborough, and I discussed yesterday morning. A little bit concerned about not being able to answer these emails. And as you know, we've gone over to the department now with our emails and taken our names, EMCs off. And now we want all the emails to go to the department. So everyone is on the same page. And when people send emails to the committee members, like they have on PFAS, then Commissioner Yarborough and I discussed not being able to answer them because it's a listserv. It's a paid service that environmentalists and so forth and special use groups who are non-governmental people use. They use listservs. So even though it has people's names on it, the body of the letter is still the same, just about. So we can answer it. I would ask the department to consider a form letter that goes out from the department. Now that we have these email addresses that's tied to DEQ, that when the listserv sends hundreds of letters, that they're form letters, that you return some way that you've received it. And thank you for your comments, or thank you for your concern. But I think just leaving it out there in a cloud, I just don't think that's the right thing to do. So I think the department, since we have our emails tied to it now, that when we get these mass mail outs or email blast, that the department responds with a letter of thank you, and that's it. If maybe the department will consider that, it would help us to know that these people that have concerns are being heard. Okay. Other than that, thank you so much, and this meeting is adjourned. The next meeting, groundwater.
Groundwater start promptly at 3:15.